So what Emma is saying is that we, the people, have the power, that we're the only ones that can make our legislatures, especially the senators, wake up and push this bill through Congress. In your packets is a yellow sheet, an action alert. We cannot do it alone, but all of us together, the power of the people can make a change. And that's what we need to make people in the United States aware of. I don't know how many of you know, but the immigration system is a quota system. And if you go into the visa bulletin that's published by the State Department each month, it shows you the number of visas available. How many of you realize that there are 4 countries of brown-skinned people who have huge quotas, and those waiting lists for those people to get there, even if they're in the line, are back to like 1992, 1987, 1995. If you're from the Philippines, if you're from China, if you're from Mexico, if you're from India, you're going to wait until the cows come home or longer before you'll ever be able to adjust your status, even if you have a U.S. citizen child who's under 21, or a permanent resident alien spouse or child or parent. I mean, the system is really, really broken, but most people haven't a clue how outdated and how broken it is.
Okay, I just want to say one more thing about contacting your congresspeople, and that is, and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've spoken with both Debbie Stabenow's staff and Vern Ayler's staff, and they said for every one call that they hear for pro-immigration reform, they get, 100 anti-immigration calls, and I think the point is really valid that it's a small minority that is louder than we are and more organized than we are. And so even though we as Christians and as neighbors to immigrants want changes, we're being completely overrun by anti-sentiment. So the senators that I've talked to and congresspeople I've talked to say, send us your faxes, send us your letters, call us, because you have to tick it in the box anti or pro, and you're being outnumbered greatly.
I think one of the things is that there's a lot of people that are anti-immigrant and so on because for whatever reason they tend to believe a lot of the myths, a lot of the rhetoric that's out there that's gotten worse and worse, and for them it's personal. And so they're very energized because this is against me, this is hurting me, this is hurting my family, this is wrong, and so it's very personal, and they become very energized. We do not tend to, those who are in favor of immigration reform, we don't get as personally involved. We don't get as energized because we're too step away, too comfortable. You know, we can occasionally maybe talk about a little bit, but we don't have the energy to put ourselves on the line, the personal attention to put ourselves on the line. That's why I go back to what I said before about the importance of connecting with people, becoming a part, walking in their shoes, sitting with them, getting to know them, making it personal for you. Making it personal, okay? We've got all these teachings in our churches, in our Catholic tradition. We've got all these documents and all these wonderful things to back us up. But it's there on paper. We don't take it to heart. And in fact, as a church, even though we have all those documentation, all that teaching, all that stuff that's based in reference to the scriptures and all that kind of stuff, it's always fine as long as it stays there in the document. When you start taking it to heart and to really do something about it and try to live it and call your church to live it and live up to what it teaches, then it becomes you're rocking the boat and becomes personal and dangerous. Okay?
So I guess there are about 12 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. That's sort of the estimate right now. And technically, somebody who has, let's say, a parent or a spouse or a child who's a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, if they've put an application in for that person who doesn't have papers, until that visa is ready, 8, 9, 10, 12 years later, and that person is in our country, that person is considered undocumented. Because without, do you know what I mean? So during that time frame, do they have access to their green card? Yes, but in a decade. So during that decade, they're undocumented, they don't have work authorization, and so, yeah, they are technically undocumented. So undocumented means somebody who came here on a visitor visa for 6 months and overstayed, years later. It includes people who walk across the border with coyotes. It includes anybody, including those who are waiting for their visa to become ready for the government to process their case. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it's really very gray to say who's documented and who's undocumented because our system is so backlogged. Clearly, we have many, many millions of people who are here without papers.
And the other thing is that we have in our system, many people who are married to citizens, like I did marry to my husband who was a citizen, if they came undocumented to this country, they don't have no possibility, at least the law changes, to become legal resident here. After 2001, there is no partner, there is no fee that they can pay. So even if their mother is a citizen and or the petition, the son or the mother, if they enter the country undocumented, then that person doesn't have no chance of becoming legal. And I think yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can I just correct one thing, Martha? That it's sort of true what you're saying because it's so difficult to get your green card. But if I'm married, if I was undocumented, I could just walk across the border without papers, and then I married a U.S. citizen today, I could apply for my green card, but I would have to go back to my home country consulate. So if I was from Mexico, I'd have to go to Ciudad Juarez and ask for my green card there. But if I were in the United States for more than a year without papers, which of course many people are, and I crossed the border to go to my own visa interview, I've triggered a 10-year bar against ever coming back into the U.S. So the law changed. The bar system showed up in 1996 to sort of get tough on immigration and very enforcement-based. But what happens is that people are too afraid to cross the border for their visa interviews because as long as they stay in the United States, they don't trigger that bar. So what happened is that it trapped people in the United States, and instead of going for my green card, I'm not going to take the risk to go back to Ciudad Juarez for my interview, because when I get there, it's not just an interview for my green card, which is difficult by itself and very expensive, but also now I have to file a waiver and ask the U.S. government, please, in your discretion, let me come back into the United States. I'm sorry for coming in without papers and for staying so long without papers. So I have to now show extreme hardship to my U.S. citizen spouse or parent, or lawful permanent resident spouse or parent. And again, this is that standard I was talking about before. It's not just regular hardship. We're depressed without being together. It's really hard on him to take care of the kids and go to work. That's just regular hardship. Yeah. So
it's very complex.
It's very complicated, and it's not like civil law or criminal law where I can go into a database and see how many cases like mine got approved last year. It's a civil system. It's all closed doors. It's an officer in Ciudad Juarez with a stack of waiver applications up to here to go through in a day, and they're human. They get tired, they get frustrated, they get annoyed, and so your future, your green card is really, I mean, as you can imagine, this is a very scary system. So you can get your green card, but I'm advising people right now to sort of really weigh the risks. Do you really want to go to Ciudad Juarez and trigger that bar and take a gamble with your waiver application? And for some people, yes, they're so sick of living in the shadows in our community and they're willing to do it. For some people, they'd rather stay with their families undocumented, but at least they're together. Okay, so the question is, there are two kinds of people that come to the United States. One is a documented class, and the other is an undocumented class. And that's true. That's a very good way to sort of compartmentalize. One group who's documented, they have a passport with a visa stamp in it that says they're a visitor, or they're here for school, or whatever, or they have their green card, maybe they got it in Ciudad Juarez, or wherever they came from, and they have a visa to come in and stay permanently. So there are temporary kinds through employers and school and visitors, and then there's the permanent kind that can be through an employer, but also mostly family members. And then those who don't have any sort of permission from the U.S. government, any formal permission from the U.S. government, yes, they are considered undocumented without papers. So you can get a green card in two different ways. One way is if you, actually there's a sort of this golden ticket for U.S. citizens, or for people who marry U.S. citizens and entered the country with a visa. So let's say I'm from the Netherlands, I come in on a 6-month visitor visa, I overstay by a few years, but I meet my husband who's a U.S. citizen. I can apply for my green card through him and actually stay in the United States to get my green card. I go to the Detroit USCIS office, Citizenship and Immigration Service, and I can get my green card here in the U.S. at a very simple, usually straightforward procedure in the country. And I don't have to trigger any bars or anything, even though I overstayed that visa. Same scenario, I came in without papers for whatever reason and married a U.S. citizen. Now, because I never knocked at the door of the U.S. government when I first came in properly, I didn't have that proper entry. It's a legal fiction. The government says, well, you never even asked for permission, so now you've got to go back to your home country and do it the right way. And so that situation, if I didn't come in with permission, then I've got to go back out to my home country and ask for my green card at a consulate. So there are two ways, one way in the country and the other way when you leave the country. But as I said, most people who come in without papers, well, everybody who comes in without papers, they have to go back home and properly knock on the door of the U.S. government. In doing so, sometimes trigger those bars. So the question is asking more about the employment-based system of how people come into the country to work for an employer. An employer typically doesn't file a green card for somebody for them to come and work. Usually they're temporary employment situations. So you'd hire a bunch of doctors from China or something to come to work for your hospital at Spectrum Health or something. Those doctors typically come over on sort of a temporary employment visa, but eventually the hospital, if they find that person to be indisposable, could apply for the green card for that person. So they wouldn't apply for a green card for somebody that they've never seen in an employment situation, at least for a couple of years. Does that make sense? So an employment visa is typically temporary, at least initially. And it's very difficult. They're very difficult. The quota is teeny. Also, these quotas, just like the family preference system, hasn't been touched in decades. Nothing's been changed to account for the technology boom or the recession. So the numbers stay the same. So H-1Bs for specialized workers usually fill up, I think, within 24 hours, the quota's over. Sometimes within a few hours in certain years. And also, these are specialized jobs. These aren't pickers. These aren't packers in factories. These aren't housekeepers. These are physicians and scientists and professors and people with extreme knowledge in specific areas. So when you see in the packet information about ag jobs or a temporary worker system, this really goes back to the pre-NAFTA days when Central and South American and Mexican workers would follow the growing cycle. They'd come up and they'd work at this family farm and then this family farm and then this family farm and then go back home to their own farm. And so the idea is that the folks who maybe don't have these specialized skills could still come in on a temporary basis and leave again, so that they could do these jobs that we need them to do, maybe on a seasonal basis or as needed basis. So that's sort of the employment side, which I don't really do employment law, so, but that's the kind of overview.